Would William Afton murder his children? Are you kidding? Okay, I'm kidding. But seriously, I've gotten this question a few times after a recent Crying Child Bite of 87 retcon video. And while this makes this question topical, I also had the video suggested to me by Marcio Hack. Though instead of this video being about why William would kill his kids, the request was to tackle the fact that some of the fanbase see William as a good father who just fell off the beaten path after the loss of his kids, or is just trying to bring them back. Yeah, no, that's one of the few things in FNAF lore that we can debunk. I mean, Elizabeth was killed by a robot that William built to kill kids, so... But let's get into that. But first, let me say something. If you have like an AU where William is a good person or a good father, then that is totally fine. And I'm not saying you can't portray an alternate universe where William is a good father. And this isn't a response to that. This is really just more trash-talking Willie. And once we get to the end of this video, you'll see why that was a good thing. So before we get into each child individually, let's start with something a little more abstract. Afton's relationship with his children seems to be based off of the narcissistic family unit. The sort of typical or outlined version of this, usually having a narcissistic parent with a golden child, a scapegoat child, and possibly a third forgotten lost child. And yes, those are actually the terms, and I will explain them. Of course, in real families this can vary, but in the case of the Aftons, this seems to be very purposeful and on point. Let me explain these terms a little better. Narcissists and narcissistic parents have traits such as an inflated self-ego and a feeling of importance, a lack of empathy, and can be abusive, neglectful, or emotionally manipulative. All of these fit William to a T, to his neglect of the crying child, to his physical abuse of Elizabeth, which is confirmed in the books. William's sense of importance and lack of empathy is pretty obvious as well. That's how he gets along making stupid decisions and still pretending that he's doing it on purpose. They can also be possessive, something William shows in unconventional ways, but does show. And they are also known to put on a superficial image, which we also know that he did. So William is almost definitely a narcissist. And I would like to point out here that this is no defense of William. Narcissism can be treated. It can't be cured, but with therapy and work, a narcissist can go on to live a healthy life. We don't see any remorse or regret from William, so we can just assume he never even tried to get treatment. I mean, narcissism isn't his only problem. Narcissism can lead to abusive parents, but it doesn't lead to them becoming serial killers with the quest to inflate themselves. But I digress for now. Now let's go into the children's terms. A golden child is a child who the narcissist favors, who they may see themselves in and groom to be more like them. Here are some signs of a golden child. A need to achieve, people-pleasing behavior, filling an adult role too early, a feel of failure, conflicting loyalties, and episodes of need panic. And I looked this up, and it's in which the golden child panics when their needs suddenly bubble up. Growing up in this environment can lead to things such as a low self-esteem and anxiety, or insecure attachments and narcissistic traits of their own. This behavior lines up well with Elizabeth and Baby. And before you ask, yes, a golden child can and very often is still physically abused. The scapegoat child is the child who takes all of the blame. Almost all of the blame somehow gets shifted to them by the narcissistic parent. In fact, it's interesting to note that the narcissistic parents are known to play their children against each other. Scapegoat children usually grow up to have trust issues, low self-esteem, and might choose partners with other narcissistic tendencies. I double-checked, and some scapegoats may also turn to acting out. Though acting out is also a prevalent occurrence in children growing up in an abusive or neglectful family. So this slot fits Michael pretty well. Now we go on to the lost child, the neglected one of the family, both physically and emotionally. The lost child doesn't get blame nor attention. They are simply left behind. This can happen easily to a quiet child, as the more independent or disliked child falls into the scapegoat role, and the more adored or preferred child becomes the golden one. Someone who doesn't fit either of those roles is pushed aside. The silent, suffering, crying child fits this niche. it was made for him. Now that we got those roles out of the way, let's discuss the known crimes of William Afton towards his children. While we don't get a clear look of William's treatment of Elizabeth before her death in the games, we do get a clear example of it in the fourth closet. Yes, I will be using the fourth closet as an example, but let me explain. Now, while the books aren't technically canon story-wise, there's some things in the books that are the same as in the games. William's behavior in the books matches up almost perfectly with his behavior in the games, going from a psychotic murderer to a mad scientist, immortal. Even if his actions are goofy, they line up. So I think we can go out on a limb and assume that William striking Elizabeth repeatedly in the book wasn't just out of character. It wasn't a non-canon AU thing. Especially with how Baby acts in the later games. The scene is disturbing, especially for a quote-unquote kids book. William, annoyed by Elizabeth, strikes her across the face, and when she tries to grab a drawing, he strikes her again, throwing her to the floor. She, at this moment, notices the sexy Charlie that Will is working on and becomes fixated. Now, with how the books were written, I can't even begin to tell if this was on purpose. But if it was, Lizzie's obsession with becoming what her father idolized and idolizing it like he did falls perfectly in line with the golden child syndrome as well. But that's not the important part here. The important part is that Lizzie was Will's preferred child, and he was still physically abusive and negligent towards her. Now moving on to the games, Baby's cold and manipulative behavior shows signs of the same narcissism as her father, along with the lack of empathy. This isn't just something kids inherit through their parents. They get it through this childhood abuse. And the abuse didn't stop. Baby was trapped working at a rental company under a system, which Afton likely had a hand in, that required her to be frequently torn apart and shocked repeatedly. All of this for his own devices. And some people believe that William was doing this as revenge for the death of Lizzie. But not only does William never show any regret or emotion towards his daughter's death, but he is well aware of Remnant and the concept of animatronics being possessed by those who die in or near them. There's little doubt that he knew Baby was possessed by Lizzie. We don't know if he did this as just a repeated punishment for Lizzie, since she didn't abide by his plans for her, or perhaps screwed up the ambitions he had planned for her, or if he is doing this under the intention of making Baby as unstable as humanly possible. William is an opportunist, and perhaps seeing his golden child trapped in his magnum opus was beneficial for him. Now let's discuss the treatment of Michael. We have only a few concrete things and one speculatory thing, but let's see what we can make of it. We know that Afton, well aware of the dangerous nature of the animatronics, sent Michael down to get his sister. We also know that at least one other person was scooped, and I'd be hard-pressed to assume that Will didn't know about that, especially since the recorded training tapes mention it outright. However, there's not enough evidence to say that William purposefully sent Michael down there as a vessel to unleash his monsters out on the world. However, he did send his son into a dangerous pit without concern for his own health, and then all but disappeared. Because it was never about her or Michael. It's just what Willie wanted. We also know that Michael got in with a bad crowd and acted out as a teenager, which, as I said before, can be a huge red flag for parental neglect. Having the crying child be the lost child who the parent doesn't pay attention to means that he would be the perfect target for Michael. Because if Michael goes after Lizzie or lashes out at Lizzie, he'll be in trouble. But if he lashes out at his younger brother, the father is not going to notice or care. The last piece of info is somewhat speculatory, but seems to be the case. In sister location, there's a soap opera playing called The Immortal and the Restless. While being a parody, the soap opera might actually be a hint into William and Michael's relationship. Vlad, a vampire in a purple suit, who kind of has, in the concept art, the same hairstyle as William in the books, is dating his love Clara, who wants him to acknowledge that their son is his. Vlad repeatedly rejects the idea. In fact, he doesn't even come through at the end. Clara just mistakes him giving her a fake ring from a kid's meal as him acknowledging that he has a son by buying a kid's meal. Vlad kind of just skirts out of it. Feels like a very William thing to do. If this truly is a connection, then we can assume that William likely had little interest in parenting Michael, or perhaps he just wasn't there for him, instead focusing on his job at a restaurant, i.e. Freddy's. Though we don't have a lot, we can feel the distance between William and Michael, and we can see the signs of him being a scapegoat. To him, literally being a scapegoat when William sent him down instead of going himself. Goat? No, more like sacrificial lamb. Now we go into the crying child, left alone at his brother's mercy in their family home. The crying child is where this all began. The confusion around the retcons in FNAF 4, which began as being teased as Bite of 87, and then became the Bite of 82, and then 83, and the confusion surrounding it. The flatline that might have been a late-game addition, or signaling the immediate death after the bite, or a death after the 5 nights where the crying child was at the mercy of the nightmares. The nightmares that Afton created. In case you're listening to this, but not watching it, let me explain the image on screen. On the left, we have a picture of the crying child's quote-unquote nightmares where he is being hunted in his home, and above it is a picture of the sister location map that shows that this place actually physically exists. In these maps, you can see marks where the animatronics are located. Baby and her band have marks. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie have marks, and so do where the nightmares are located, confirming that they, at least Nightmare Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, are real animatronics, and that Afton is monitoring them, as he does with Baby, and as he does with Fredbear. It should be noted that these are labeled as Observation Room 1 and Observation Room 2. He is observing the crying child. Oddly enough, he labels these locations, one of which should be Fredbear's, as just an observation room, not a restaurant. Perhaps that's why the layout of the map is so peculiar. Beside them is a picture of the private office and sister location, where you can see a direct feed into these rooms. The map suggests they are directly linked together. This is not the crying child's bedroom. The crying child's bedroom, as shown in the minigames of FNAF 4, looks leagues different, only having the same color scheme. Beside that, we have a picture of the sister location map showing the exact location that the crying child walked through and his home. On the right is a picture of the crying child talking to the omnipotent psychic friend Fredbear, making his usual cryptic comments. And beneath it is a picture of the same Golden Freddy plush now located in the private office in Afton Robotics. A radio is resting against its chest. You know, Henry used to leave messages to his daughter in her toys. In Fazbear Frights, Jake's father used to speak to him through a doll on a radio. Non-canon, perhaps, but ideas used over and over again. That was the man the fanbase believes is the crying child, the source of the name Evan. But who was speaking through that doll? The puppet? Fredbear? Well, Afton reclaimed it. Afton has the radio. Afton had it in the private office where if employees go into it, they are immediately fired and are supposedly pulled out by a team. Afton was the manipulative one, and the crying child's friend, though claiming he was a friend, just watched and added to the misery with bleak comments and little guidance. Why didn't he warn him where his brother was? He doesn't offer any comfort, he just stokes the fire, pitting the siblings further against each other. He left without you again. He hates you, he whispers from one of his many mounted duplicate forms. The ones outside are dead and lifeless, but inside the house they have the same lights in their eyes. In one instance, he tells him to run into the pizzeria, that he'll find help in there. But all that's there is the stage. Who is he supposed to be going towards? He's running away from the workers. And he wasn't there during the bite. Not a word. Dead silent. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm sorry, Michael's voice says, and we know it's Michael's voice from the color of his text. The crying child's friend shows no such remorse. You're broken, he says bluntly. Baby also said she was broken. She's broken, but she can't be fixed. A ruse, yes, but strangely similar. Maybe she's mimicking something she heard someone else say. But I'm still here. We're still your friends, the doll continues. Who's we're? He refers to himself as I, so it cannot be him. The other plushies aren't alive either. And though the timeline is hard to pin down, for all intents and purposes, the missing children incident shouldn't have occurred yet. Yet the plushies are shown to be there, then disappearing, like they are the ones who he means. Maybe he just wants the crying child to know he's not alone, making sure he identifies these faces as being friendly. Let's repeat the question. Why would Afton kill his children? So he can put them back together again. You know what the best thing was about the puppet putting those children into the suits? It did exactly what Afton wanted it to do. It found his so-called joy of creation. But that, too, is just another story lost to time.